Hello, welcome to Sound and Fury Book Reviews. As usual, I'm Tina. First of all, do you like my bright pink shirt? My friend gave me like a bag of clothes she didn't want, and there was this pink shirt, and I was like, I don't know, I don't usually wear pink. And then I tried it on, and I was like, you know what? No, I actually really like this shirt. So, back to the book reviews. Today I am reviewing The Fall of Chronopolis by Barrington J Bayley. This is a book that came out in 1974 from Daw. It's a classic sci-fi. I got this book from a used bookstore, and as I mentioned, this is one of my classic sci-fi book reviews. If you haven't seen one of these before, I give you a spoiler-free little mini review at the start. Then I give you a synopsis from my brain, which tends to have errors, and that's fine. You can correct me in the comments. And then I go through my classic sci-fi bingo, which allows me to do a deeper dive into this strange little weird book. So, to start off, The Fall of Chronopolis overcompensates for its rather lackluster plot and characters with an extensive focus on the mechanics of time travel. So if time travel really turns your crank, you will be really riveted by this one. What is it about? There is a real time, and there is potential time. By controlling the difference, the Chronotic Empire came into existence and maintained itself for over 1,000 years of human history. Its time fleets, armadas of time-traveling fortresses, patrolled its temporal borders relentlessly, blotting out potential time deviations, erasing errors of history that might undermine the Empire. But nevertheless, the Empire's days were numbered, for somewhere in its own future was the century of the hegemony, its implacable enemy. Okay, that was not a lot of detail. So, quite frankly, while not a book I disliked, this book had my interest waning and waxing. The story moved very fast and had some interesting world building, but the characters were incredibly fast, and the hyperfixation on trying to explain how time travel worked was actually a detriment for me. Time travel stories are most successful when they don't provide too much explanation, I find. They either choose the paradox or the branch method and go from there. This is one that tried to do both, which served to invalidate both of them in my mind. Now, if you have it bad for time travel, you just can't get enough of it, you might love this. But I'll admit, time travel is not my favorite subgenre sometimes. I will always give it a chance, as sometimes it's awesome, but this one did not fall into the awesome category. So, I honestly can't tell you too much about the characters other than we have a framed soldier trying to unframe himself / save the world, and a bunch of random other people with nothing much to differentiate them from one another, as well as a death and torture cult that are chasing the lone female character around and torturing her. Fun. Now, I will say there is a bit of a twist at the end, not having to do with time travel, really, which was the book's saving grace for me, because it was amazing. But overall, I'd say there are far more interesting vintage sci-fis in the world than The Fall of Chronopolis. In fact, the real Fall of Chronopolis was the fact that this book was not very good. So, there's my review. If you disagree, if this is your favorite book of all time, let me know why. So next we have my very shitty synopsis of the book. From this point on, it is all spoilers all the time, so be prepared. I mean, you had 50 years to read this book, so I'm sure it's fine. It's fine. So, we have the Chronotic Empire, which is basically like the time variance agency from the Loki show, if you've watched that, but where they believe time travel is tied to religion. They believe their empire is justified by God because God controls all time, and thus whatever they do must be correct. Nonsense logic. They go back in time to squash rebellion, they go back in time to squash rebellions before they reach their current timeline in order to keep their, empire going. Yeah, they're the bad guys. There's also these other people, the hegemony, who are trying to stop the Chronotic Empire. They were mentioned in the back cover blurb. I will get to them in a minute. In terms of characters, we have Anton, a soldier. He's pretty high up. I can't remember his rank. He might be a lieutenant or something. Who, during an attack from the hegemony, is not only thrown into the time stream, which is it's just how they explain kind of how they can move back and forth through time. I'm not going to try to explain it. It's too complicated and it's kind of boring. But Anton is betrayed by some of his fellow soldiers who happen to be in this weird death and torture cult. They blame him for the attack. So his superiors blame him for, the attack. They don't blame him for the attack. So his superiors, brand him as a, dereliction of duty or, or they think he's part of the cult. I can't remember. Either way, he's sentenced to death, but a very specific death where he's sent back in time with the target, and there's a command implanted in him that kills him when someone speaks it. So basically, he goes back in time to tell one of the generals that attacked this city or something, and then they say a word, and he's supposed to pass over dead. So while this kind of plot is building in the background, We get a bunch of little subplots of various other people that tie into the other plot at the end, but they don't really have anything worth mentioning kind of overall because no one kind of really has any depth. But one of these is Prince Vro, who is obsessed with finding out who stole his dead sister's body because he loves her in an incestual way. Yeah, that's fun. Why this part was included is beyond me. Why we need the dead sister's body, I can't remember. I think it's tied to the death and torture cult, but really I don't know. I can't remember. The only reason he and a few of the other less interesting characters are in this story are to help Anton. His name's Aton, but I can't say it. So Anton in small ways later. Through a series of random events, Anton ends up surviving his suicide mission, overcoming the kill button within him because his previous exposure to the time stream made him immune. Before he got framed, he actually spent a few minutes staring into the time stream, and that kind of can make you go insane. So he didn't go quite insane, but I guess it kind of like changed his... It gave him a kind of ability to withstand the time stream. I don't know. It's like getting a vaccine for the time stream. Anyway, he meets the hegemony and realizes they aren't the bad guys at all, but Terrence, who simply wanted to live outside the Chronotic Empire's religious aspects originally and began intervening when they saw the Chronotic Empire destroying past places to keep itself in control. It's also revealed that the weird death and torture cult have been sacrificing people to its god Hulmu, who is actually... So this is the big twist I mentioned. So you think that this cult is just like a bunch of nutters, but it turns out there actually is a god, and the god is a sixth-dimensional demon that feeds on authentic experiences. So these cult members kidnap, torture, let go, and repeat these steps on a person like for years in order to get them to like a level mentally where they are so just done with it, their terror and their so immense that they give in to their death, and then that feeds the monster. Yeah, okay. Of course, they do this to a woman in the book, the only woman character, Empress. Yeah, there's a rape scene. I was like, oh, great. I love this so much. So Aton goes back in time and stops the doctor who originally created time travel from doing so, which will stop Hulmu from eating everyone's souls, essentially. Gets two birds stoned at once, to quote Ricky from the Trailer Park Boys. The end. Yeah, so this book had some things about it that I thought were interesting, and some things that I was just like, okay. So yeah, not the best book in the world, but whatever. Anyway, onto my classic sci-fi bingo. I also realized that time travel, which is a huge subset of not only classic sci-fi but sci-fi in general, is not on my bingo chart, which is ridiculous. So I'm going to replace tech from today with time travel starting today and going forward, as I think you can blend outdated science and tech from today together. So anyway, I'm constantly changing my bingo chart. So, outdated science. No, not really. Time travel is still theoretical, and there's nothing really tech or science-based in the book aside from the spaceships, and they're also related to time travel. So I would say, no, there's like nothing outdated science for me is like if there were like telephones or something. A spaceship blows up. Yep, the ship with both the best and stupidest name in history gets destroyed. The ship is called Smasher of Enemies. I love it. I also hate it. It's so good. It's so stupid. It's like what my 7-year-old would call a ship. Yeah, so it's amazing, actually. Social changes. I mean, I would argue seeing incest as normal in the future is kind of a social change, but it's also the royalty doing it, and they've done weird stuff like that all throughout history, so I would say no, not a social change. Other than that, there's no real social changes at all. There's no women in the military. Sexy female scientists, no, we get Empress and some vapid princesses, none of whom, work in STEM, so no. Cool aliens, there are no aliens in this. There's no ancient tech and ruins, there's no generation ship. There are space soldiers, as Aton is one. AI and robots, yes, there is a robot. I didn't mention it in my little synopsis because it really doesn't do anything in the plot, but it's called the Imperator, and it is an advanced AI, and it is trying to keep itself alive by not letting the Chronotic Empire know about the threats from Hulmu. So it is kind of related to the plot, but it's actually more like a Deus Ex Machina for Aton to kind of realize what's going on. The AI just tells him what's going on. You're like, okay, that was exciting. New worlds. I guess the Imperial City kind of planet, the Chronotic capital, but it's not described very well, so I'm not going to count it because it's not very interesting. Cyberpunk, no. Blatant sexism. There's not so much sexism, but this book does not treat women well. Empress is the only female character who does anything, and all she does is be kidnapped, tortured, sexually assaulted, and then nearly sacrificed, only to be saved by the hero. She is the ultimate damsel, and she only exists to show how bad the bad guys are, and for the hero to have someone to save. She's also called a girl constantly, despite being 30. If she were 20 or 21, fine, but 30? No, come on, she's a woman. Yeah, I was not impressed with how women were handled in this book at all, if you couldn't tell. But I mean, half the time that's what it's like in the books I read from this era. I'm used to it. I'm moving on. Reptile aliens, no. LGBTQ plus, there is, but I'm not giving a check mark because it's only used for shock value. One of the princes is gay, but only for versions of himself. We can debate whether boning your clone is weird or some other time, but the fact that he's the only gay character and his sole personality trait is being gay and boning his clone, I love saying that phrase, I'm going to say it again, this is not representation. It's used for shock value, so that does not count. Portals, there's no portals. There's no microfiche. The Malin sees a dick. No, Aton is boring as hell, but he is not a jerk. Post-apocalyptic, I get a little check mark here because we get a brief mention that Earth is a post-apocalyptic desert. So yeah, I guess. Wild weapons, yeah, they have time distorters, which alter the fabric of time directly to kill people. So like they shoot it at you and then you're altered out of time. Okay, that is a pretty wild weapon. Racial equality, no one's race is mentioned, so I would assume no. Mind possession, there's none of that. Galactic war, yes, between the chronotic and the hegemony. Time travel, obviously. Bechdel test, ha, no. Quick bonus, no, there's no alien-human romance. There is no female main character. And derelict ship, no, there's no derelict ship. So, no. Yeah, this does not get a bingo. You know what? It's fine. It's not the worst book I've ever read. I didn't quit. I liked it more than Cross of Empire, so that's good. It seems like it's like every other book. It's like one is lukewarm feeling, and then the other I'm like, I loved this. So if you want to watch a review of me loving a book, check out my last one. I'll link it here at the bottom, called Polymath. That one was amazing. So yeah, sorry, Barrington. How come people don't name their kids like Barrington anymore? These classic sci-fi authors always have such like fun names. Barrington. Do you know a Barrington? Let me know in the comments. Thanks.